In the bustling religious landscape of ancient Judea, one group stood out among the rest, the Sadducees. As the religious elite of their time, the Sadducees wielded immense power and influence, shaping the religious and political landscape of the region. Yet, their story is one of a dramatic downfall, as they were ultimately humbled by the teachings and actions of a young, charismatic figure, Jesus of Nazareth. The Sadducees were a powerful and influential religious group that emerged in the Second Temple period of ancient Judea, roughly from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. They were members of the aristocratic priestly class, closely associated with the temple in Jerusalem and the high priesthood. Unlike the Pharisees, another prominent religious group of the time, the Sadducees adhered to a more conservative interpretation of Jewish law and tradition. They rejected the oral Torah, which the Pharisees had compiled and which formed the basis of the Talmud, and instead relied solely on the written Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. The Sadducees also differed from the Pharisees in their beliefs about the afterlife. While the Pharisees believed in the resurrection of the dead and the existence of angels and spirits, the Sadducees rejected these concepts, adhering to a more materialistic worldview. Despite their relatively small numbers, the Sadducees wielded significant political and religious power in ancient Judea. As members of the aristocratic priestly class, they controlled the temple in Jerusalem and the Sanhedrin, the supreme Jewish governing and judicial body. This position allowed them to shape the religious and social landscape of the region, as they had the authority to interpret and enforce Jewish law. The Sadducees' close association with the temple and the high priesthood also meant that they had a complex relationship with the Roman authorities who ruled over Judea during the time of Jesus. The Romans had granted the Sadducees a significant degree of autonomy in religious and legal matters, as long as they maintained order and loyalty to the Roman Empire. This arrangement was beneficial for both parties. The Romans were able to maintain control over the region with minimal effort, while the Sadducees were able to preserve their power and influence. However, this delicate balance was often tested, as the Sadducees' desire to maintain their religious and political dominance sometimes clashed with the Romans' need for stability and compliance. This tension was particularly evident during times of unrest and rebellion, such as the Jewish-Roman Wars of the 1st century CE. During these conflicts, the Sadducees often found themselves caught between their loyalty to the temple and their desire to appease the Roman authorities. This precarious position ultimately contributed to their downfall, as they were unable to navigate the increasingly volatile political landscape effectively. It is against this backdrop that the Sadducees' encounter with Jesus of Nazareth must be understood. As the religious elite of Judea, the Sadducees viewed Jesus and his teachings as a direct threat to their power and influence. The Gospels describe numerous instances where Jesus engaged in heated debates and confrontations with the Sadducees, challenging their interpretation of Jewish law and their privileged position within society. One of the most notable encounters is recorded in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where the Sadducees attempt to stump Jesus with a question about the resurrection of the dead. In this passage, the Sadducees present Jesus with a hypothetical scenario involving a woman who marries a series of brothers, one after the other, as per the Levirate marriage custom. They then ask Jesus, whose wife will she be in the resurrection? Matthew 22 verse 28. The Sadducees' intention was to expose the supposed absurdity of the concept of resurrection, which they rejected. However, Jesus masterfully turns the tables on them, responding with an explanation that not only refutes their argument but also affirms the reality of the afterlife. This confrontation highlights the fundamental differences between the Sadducees and Jesus in their understanding of Jewish theology and the nature of the divine. While the Sadducees clung to a more literal and limited interpretation of the Torah, Jesus presented a more expansive and spiritually-focused vision of the divine and the afterlife. The Gospels also depict the Sadducees as being actively involved in the plot to have Jesus arrested and executed. As the religious and political elite of Judea, the Sadducees saw Jesus as a threat to their power and influence, and they were determined to silence him. In the Gospel of John, we read that the chief priests and the Pharisees convened a meeting of the Sanhedrin, the governing council of which the Sadducees were a part, to discuss how to deal with Jesus. The Sadducees, led by the high priest Caiaphas, argued that it was better for one man to die for the people, John 11 verse 50, than for the entire nation to be destroyed. This chilling statement reveals the Sadducees' willingness to sacrifice an individual, in this case, Jesus, in order to preserve their own power and authority. The Gospels go on to describe how the Sadducees, along with the Pharisees, ultimately succeeded in having Jesus arrested, put on trial, and crucified by the Roman authorities. The Sadducees' involvement in Jesus' execution is a pivotal moment in the Gospels, as it sets the stage for the dramatic events that follow, including the resurrection and the spread of Christianity. The Sadducees' actions against Jesus can be seen as a desperate attempt to maintain their grip on power in the face of a growing and influential religious movement that threatened to upend their privileged position. The Gospels portray the Sadducees' downfall and ultimate disappearance from history as a direct consequence of their opposition to Jesus and his teachings. In the aftermath of Jesus' crucifixion and the subsequent rise of Christianity, the Sadducees' power and influence began to wane rapidly. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE by the Roman army was a particularly devastating blow to the Sadducees, as it robbed them of their primary source of power and legitimacy. Without the temple, the Sadducees' control over the religious and political affairs of Judea was significantly diminished. Moreover, the emergence of Christianity as a rapidly growing and influential religious movement posed a direct challenge to the Sadducees' beliefs and authority. The Christian message of salvation through Jesus, the resurrection of the dead, and the existence of angels and spirits directly contradicted the Sadducees' more materialistic and conservative theological positions. As a result, the Sadducees were increasingly marginalized and their influence within Judean society began to dwindle. By the end of the 1st century CE, the Sadducees had all but disappeared from the historical record, with no further mention of them in the writings of Josephus or the Talmud, the central text of Rabbinic Judaism. The Gospels, in particular, portray the Sadducees' downfall as a divine judgment, a consequence of their rejection of Jesus and their attempts to silence him. The rapid decline and eventual disappearance of the Sadducees from history is seen as a testament to the power and enduring legacy of Jesus' teachings, which ultimately proved victorious over the religious elite who sought to suppress them. The story of the Sadducees is a complex and intriguing one, reflecting the intricate interplay between religious, political, and social forces in ancient Judea. As the religious elite of their time, the Sadducees wielded significant power and influence, shaping the religious and political landscape of the region. However, their encounter with Jesus of Nazareth and their attempts to silence him ultimately led to their downfall and disappearance from history. The Gospels depict the Sadducees as being humbled and defeated by the teachings and actions of Jesus, a young, charismatic figure who challenged their conservative interpretation of Jewish law and their privileged position within society. The Sadducees' rapid decline and ultimate disappearance from the historical record serve as a powerful testament to the enduring legacy of Jesus' teachings and the profound impact they had on the religious landscape of ancient Judea. Their story serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of clinging to power and influence at the expense of spiritual growth and openness to new ideas. As we look back on the history of the Sadducees, we are reminded of the fragility of human institutions and the enduring power of the divine. The Sadducees' story reminds us that true religious and spiritual authority comes not from political or social status, but from a deep and sincere commitment to the teachings of the divine.